In this video, we're going to talk about handling upset people. This is something HR does quite a bit, and we usually learn by trial and error, but maybe there are some tips that might make it easier. That's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, the host of HR Shop Talk. On the show, you get expert insight in anything that has to do with HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or the podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Roxanne Derhodge. Roxanne is a psychotherapist, keynote speaker, author, and host of her own podcast called Authentic Living with Roxanne. Hi, Roxanne. How are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. So, as I said in the intro, HR deals with quite a few upset people now and again. But before we talk about how to handle those different kinds of upset people, what can that emotional agitation when someone comes into your office or cubicle or whatever it is really upset, what can that do to us? And how can we handle ourselves?
Well, I think, as human beings, we're all about energy, if you think of it like that, right? So if someone's already perturbed, they're not coming in and saying, hey, can I sit down and speak to you? They're like, can you believe what's on? They come into an agitated state. So from a neuroscience perspective, you recognize that when someone's coming at you as human beings, we go automatically into fight, flight, or freeze. So if someone's coming, their voice is elevated, their face is visibly distraught, your body's going to react. We have something in our body called mirror neurons. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, where in fact our bodies kind of mirror and join the space of the individual coming into it, according to neuroscience. What happens is, depending on so many variables, right? You're automatically going to be triggered most times. And some of us may be a little bit more heightened compared to others. So it's recognizing as soon as that happens, you're going to go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? You might be like stunned, or you might maybe get a bit more elevated. So it's just your body and your brain saying, this doesn't feel so good right now. I got to do something to protect myself, if you look at it like that. And then it's really about, initially, the prefrontal cortex, I call it the boss of the brain, says, I'm going on vacation. The middle part of the brain is where all the little kind of triggers, I call it with the little ones, like you could describe this to your kids. It's like Christmas tree bulbs, like lighting up.
Yes.
And then in the back of the brain, the little reptile part of the brain, the reptilian, or the oldest part of the brain, goes into, protection. So if you look at it like that, that being said, when that's happening, you're not thinking about all of that, right? You're like, okay, what's happening here? Calm down. You're not being nice. So to recognize, what space can I then create for myself to create that gap, right? So if let's say somebody comes elevated into your office and they're screaming or yelling, instead of saying, what's your problem? Just say, obviously you're upset. Maybe let's just take a second here. I really want to hear what's going on, right? Because you're just changing the tempo. You're saying to them, because they're into fight, right?
Yes.
And your automatic instinct is to go into fight. You can go, wow, something must have really happened. I really want to hear about this, but right now with your voice elevated, I'm not really understanding what you're saying. I'm just wondering. I really want to get to the bottom of this with you, but I want you to really, I want you to, share it with me in a clear way. So I think, let me get you a glass of water, or let's sit down in that office in the back. So you're creating a bit of distance.
Yes.
Right. You're just slowing the process already. So if I'm saying we're mirroring, right, all you're doing is you're saying, you're up here. I'm going to try to bring you down here a little bit more. And I'm going to say, wow, I'm joining with them to say, oh yeah, that sounds like this has been tough on you. I really want to know more, but I really want to make sure that I hear everything. When we're dysregulated, all we're trying to do is feel a little bit safe again. So you're just going to be like, okay, I have to recognize what is that individual that's being so upset triggering in me. Maybe the HR person's like, I've never decided that nobody's going to condescend to me like that again, blah, blah, blah. And where's the brain bringing you so that you have that thought versus saying, this is a distressed person that had just had a conflict with somebody on the line and they were really, really rude to them or whatever. It's about you bringing yourself back into the present to say, okay, what is my role? What objective facts do I have about the situation? And right now, I don't have many objective facts. All I have is somebody's spewing subjective things about what happened to them. And your space is just to say, okay, I'm not going to join their space, their internal space at that time.
You know, if people watch nothing but what you just said, I think that is going to be so valuable. How can you make someone who comes to you upset feel better while maintaining your own sense of integrity and not necessarily agreeing with every single thing they say?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a step before that, Andrea.
Okay.
It's just to join them. It's the term that we would use clinically is called attunement. So I am really, really upset and I feel agitated probably. So my job is just to try to say to them, without agreeing with everything, just to say, yeah, this is a tough thing to have been through, but I just feel like we have to slow down a little bit. And if the person says, well, you don't get it or whatever, just say, yeah. I'm sure I didn't get it, but the only way I can kind of really assist is if I'm able to walk through it a little bit with you at a time. And that's attunement. And when we train as psychologists or psychotherapists, we would literally sit across from someone and try to mirror their energy. Now, I'm not suggesting that your HR partners go and do that, but it's something that we all can learn. If you think about if you're in conflict with anybody, whether at work or personally or the hockey rink or whatever, if you just go to that space, what you naturally would do is bring that other person down, unless they're kind of so far gone. So I think you're just trying to attune to say, I hear you, I see you, I validate you. Let's just slow this down a little bit.
And when you say I validate you, it doesn't mean you're saying I validate what you're saying. I validate
you that you're upset right now.
Okay.
You're upset. I'm not saying I'm agreeing with why you're upset.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get you to the point where you could put this logical part of the brain back on. When you're that heightened, which you can't say that to the individual, you're not going to be able to be clear. And I assure you, I want to hear everything you have to say. So if you engage with them in that state, you're not going to get to resolution, right? So you can't come to resolution at that point. You just say, tell me more.
So I'm going to circle back to that feeling of incongruency on the part of the HR person. So a lot of people have come to me over the years being mad about a coworker or more often their supervisor. And they're so mad. But from my perspective, the supervisor is my client, or maybe the coworker is someone I know and like, and it's super awkward. Like, what can I say to you that will calm the situation down, but doesn't, betray my relationship with this other coworker or the supervisor?
Well, you have to listen openly, because maybe there's a valid point there, right?
Yes,
maybe there's a skill deficit in your partner or your colleague that you don't see. So I think you have to, say, okay, help me understand what you're experiencing. And what steps have you taken to resolve it? Tell me the actual steps you've taken to go forward with them. And maybe, tell me how you've approached it. So if they don't know what to say, you maybe might coach them a bit to kind of get those steps and say, okay, well, you know what I'm going to do as the HR partner, I'm going to give you 3 days to go back to that individual and try to have that conversation and resolve it. In 3 days, if you're not able to, then at that point, we maybe should look at the next step. So you have to separate that out, because, what that does is it creates that dissension and lack of trust with employees as well. So you have to separate out those relationships and really show that you're acting in integrity also in your role as HR, and not being different because you understand that individual.
If something from this has got you thinking the way I have, it's got me thinking, comment. What charge situation have you dealt with, and how did it go? Let us know in the comment section. So sometimes we get attacked for decisions we didn't make, but we have to support. What are your thoughts about this? How can we support decisions that we may not actually agree with personally?
That's a tough one, right? I would say that's definitely a tough position to be in, but we've all been in those positions. I know in my various roles, I've been in that, but at the end of the day, it's about using your communication skills to have the employee coming to you understand your role, and that you're there to support them. But this is this is a level. I'm not suggesting you be two-faced, right? Oh, I don't agree with this decision. You just say, this is something that has come down. It's a strategic decision by senior leadership team. And, maybe the employee might try to rope you into it. And you're, as a business partner, HR business partner, you have to be diplomatic. So you have to really think through, what is it that I need to work through within myself. And if I'm like, well, Roxanne, you should go along, but I don't know, and your nonverbals is showing the employee or the person in front of you, that is something you can work on.
This maybe relates to other examples, but I've been in front of crowds of people facilitating something, and I get there and I think, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. I'm going to do my thing in and out. And all of a sudden you're confronted with a room full of angry people. Do you have any tips in that?
Well, at that point, you're going to have to, what if the outcome is to deliver a message, then you're going to have to think about, okay, how is it that I'm going to deliver that message? Do not ever shut anybody down. Okay. If you have disruptive people, you might say something like, I know that you sound very passionate about this, but maybe we can give you a bit of time at the end. If there are people that are disgruntled, you acknowledge their disgruntlement and say, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I'm going to note that down. And if you have, missiles coming at you, you're going to have to be as diplomatic as possible and say, okay, I'm jotting these things down. Today I came to deliver about the new benefit package, if that's what you're doing, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But I will keep some of these things into advisement. And if they're really, really important, I would suggest you come and, you chat with HR.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you can't, if you start going after things, if you don't have the information, but it's above their level, you have to know how to communicate accordingly, right? How are you communicating? They always say, scanty at the top, a little bit more at the down, and you can't tell about everything that's happening to run a business. And, so to get caught in that situation, you just have to be able to manage. You have to, be able to be open, hear people, acknowledge them, try not to shut them down, say, oh, okay, guys, I'm just going to try. My job today is to get to the end of this. I'm so sorry, I can't respond to that, but I'll shortly, would you go back to your supervisor, come back to your HR person? And, if these things don't get resolved, please come back to HR and we'll ensure that you get to the right person.
Yeah. I would add to that sometimes, and if you have the time, they're hijacking a meeting, right? People come upset and they're hijacking the meeting, and to be able to say, well, clearly something else here is more important than what I have to say. So how about we I have to make my presentation, but how about we devote this much time to what you are upset about? And then I will condense what I have to say.
Yeah. And I think, just in silencing, all you're going to do is create more dissension.
Yeah.
And you will get your disruptors, right? You get that one or two that you always have in every presentation. So you kind of keep that in the back of your head.
Yes.
But what you don't want to do is to shut down validity. Because I often say if there's little nuances kind of bubbling up, there's certain percentage of that would be real, which HR should not be missing, and taking that back to whoever needs to hear that is important.
Yeah.
So the real valid things don't get lost, but the dissenters or the fire starters, you kind of, after a while, they'll blaze out. I often say, because nobody aligns with them when they're realizing they're just making trouble to make trouble. But if there are some core things that are kind of imminent or coming, that white noise is indication that you need to listen. And like you said, to contextualize and say, tell me more. I'm going to go back to, my VP or my EVB to feed it back to them. And I think so giving people time, sometimes that's all that people need, Andrea, is the ability to vent or purge or whatever. And then and then it goes away. But if it's something that every meeting that's happening, that's telling you that's a bigger issue.
So like a lot of times when people come to you in HR, their minds are so made up. Mm-hmm. They are determined that, for example, their supervisor is the worst supervisor on the face of this earth and totally irredeemable. This is probably a whole conversation by itself, but can you massage that at all when people are so entrenched?
Well, it depends if it's been cumulative, right? So if it's that cumulative, it's going to take you a while to detangle that. Mm-hmm. And I would probably ask more curious questions like, when did this start? What did you try to do to resolve this? What is it that you needed differently from, the manager above your supervisor? Did you go to HR? Try to get the facts on both ends. I think, because if you don't know the facts and you go into solution, you're then becoming part of the problem. So I think just trying to say, you know what? This seems like it's a lot. I just need, I be strategic about what you're asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because remember, you're going to go into the bad person's raw energy, and maybe they've been dealing with it for way too long in silence, and maybe they've been keeping it all in, and they've never gone forward to get what they needed. And this is the first time they're about to blow. They're like this, the volcano is like about to erupt. And you're like, okay, help me understand what you did to help yourself through this. And what did you do internally? And if they start to tell you that they've tried and they've been rebuffed or not been addressed, then you're like, aha, there's more to this. But if you realize that this person has just been stewing and just like grinding it out and not going to anybody then you're like, oh, okay. So then you could have more of a strategic conversation with them potentially about what they could do differently. But eventually, you want them to also take responsibility for what part was their role. Because people, HR or the supervisor or the director can't change things if they're unaware that there's an issue, right? If they're using ineffective ways of getting their issues addressed. But if you realize like, wow, they've tried this and then this happened and they tried this and this person dropped the ball, then you could kind of see what company responsibility there is and when, in maybe not supporting the employee in the way that they needed to. And then that kind of, again, you're stepping back a bit to say, all right, and you're listening in a different way as well. Because people are just probably so accustomed to being shut down to if it's valid. I think a lot of times people say, well, my supervisor should know. I told them once or this, that, or the other. Right, and then they stop trying. And then they just kind of ruminate, right, in their brain. Yes. Like I said, over and over again. And then they start to label the supervisor. And then they look for the one thing that the supervisor maybe did imperfectly. And then they go, aha. And it's like they're building this case.
Sounds like relationships at home too.
Absolutely. I agree.
Thanks, Roxanne. There was just so much wisdom in that and just so many takeaways for me. I did an episode on appreciation at work and an episode the link to that is right here. Thanks for watching and see you next time.